thanks again for turning up to this session here. And it's interesting that this talk landed in the tools and development section because it's more of a talk about culture and the impact of what's happening in culture on developers, on publishers, and how they design games, how they iterate those games, and the trends that we're actually seeing. My background, for people that aren't familiar with myself, is that if you saw the early talk by William Tatt on the history of gaming, I was involved with the third generation of Engage, so launching the software platform with the App Store and microtransactions and so forth. I was also involved with chairing a physics middleware company that eventually got acquired by NVIDIA. And about 8 years ago, I launched one of the first location-based games that got nominated for a Digital Emmy. So I've been heavily involved in the mobile games industry for a while. And now I'm coming in as the incoming CEO to a new social gaming platform targeting gamers and their gaming interests called Eversys. And what I'll be talking about at the end of the talk here is the learnings we've had since our launch from a few weeks ago, a closed beta, and why I'm quite excited about it. So what I'm covering here are sort of four main talking points. Is influencers are the new currency, some social media stats that you might not be familiar with, and then also looking at what are the differences between macro and micro communities? What does that actually mean? And then some of the learnings that we've actually seen going forward. So influencers are the new currency. So who's probably the biggest influencer in games at the moment? Anyone give us some idea? Okay, there's one. Ninja, okay, third guess. Okay, so we've got two suggestions there. So let's have a look at this then. So one example of what happened recently is, I'm not saying Kylie Jenner is the influencer in games, but I'm using her as an example here, is that she made a comment about Snapchat. And when she made a comment about Snapchat, Snapchat's market value dropped about $1.3 billion when she made that comment. And so what we're seeing is that influencers are making comments, they're making videos of when they're playing games and so forth. And while they're playing these games, they're also commentating about product design. And I saw one particular video which was interesting where the influencer was playing the game, and during the game they were saying, I hope they do not change this and reduce the number of resources down to 500. That means newbies can actually then kill us with us unable to build against them and so forth. And they were commentating that and commentating to the publisher, okay, don't do this change, and so forth. So these influencers are becoming quite powerful and impacting what happens in the product. So some of the stats that we're seeing with these influencers. So I asked the question who the most powerful influencer was in gaming. Who do you think the most powerful influencer in general is in terms of social media interactions across any topic? If you measure the number of interactions that happens on social media with that influencer, would it be someone in fashion? Is it someone in politics? Is it someone in sport? So, interestingly enough, in the month of April, the most dominant influencer in social interactions was actually Ninja. So he had 150 million interactions, and coming number 2 was Ronaldo with 139, and then number 3, Virat Kohli in this great sport, cricket. And those are a number of interactions that were happening during April. And you can have a look at, you suddenly have in there Shaquille O'Neal, you got some soccer players, and you've got some mixed martial arts and so forth. Moving on to May, you see Ronaldo is starting to come up again, and Ninja has improved his influences, but Ronaldo made a big jump. And you're actually starting to see the cricketer go down, and more football players in there, and then you've got a functional fitness influencer in there at number 10. So why do you think that change happened from April to May? Why did Ronaldo suddenly go on top? Yeah, well, leading up to the World Cup. So as you move on, you suddenly see in June, Ronaldo jumps up to 214 million. Ninja is still there in the top 3. But you see suddenly it's starting to be dominated mostly by football players, soccer players, and you've got the esports of Ninja in there, and then you've got one cricket player. And then July hits, okay, it drops down again, and Ninja's still in the top 3, and then suddenly you start having Colin McGregor in there. And I can't recall why Colin McGregor was in there. Was it actually related to a fight, or was it related to some criminal activity? Nevertheless, you're starting to see that that's the impact that influencers are having in terms of social interactions. I pulled up this slide just a couple of days ago with regards to the social media stats. And so you've got Ronaldo at number 1 with 260 million followers. Apparently he dropped 71 million followers. So don't know exactly if they were fake accounts or so forth, but he had a lot of drops. Tyler, Ninja, only had about 30 million followers, but he still came in at number 2 in terms of the number of interactions. All this data you can get from a site called Hookit. So you can look up that activity, and they publish monthly data regarding social influencers out there. And the common theme that you see here again is that it's pretty dominated by sports. You've got esports in there, you've got some martial arts, got some basketball, but you're seeing that football still is very much the dominant social influencer out there as a general area. The other topics that you might actually hear about is with regards to Twitter. The rumour is that Twitter truly exists only for 2 things. One is for Donald Trump, and the other one is for games and what is happening with games and the games industry. So if we have a look at that, Ninja, focusing on the game side, Ninja was the number 1 esports or gaming influencer out there. How much value do you think that generated for Epic or Fortnite? Because it was around the game Fortnite that Ninja was actually being very much playing and influencing the community there. How much value did that actually generate? So you look at it and you can see that the earned media value by that actual influencer of Ninja was calculated to be about almost $27 million of earned media value based on what was actually happening out there, both on Twitter and Instagram. So suddenly you got this situation. Again, why is this important to publishers and developers? You've got one influencer there that is working with your brand, making comments about your game, playing the game, having a huge following, and actually also making product design recommendations and so forth about how the game should be played or how the game should evolve. So you need a mechanism to actually take that data in and use that when you're actually going through with development. So moving on, macro and micro communities. Now, this is something which, again, I think in many ways is pretty obvious. And people will go, why is this so obvious? Well, you've lived it every day through what you've been doing with communities such as YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and so forth. But when you understand how you work with those types of communities and the value that they generate, it becomes much more interesting and much more influential on what you do as a developer. So at macro communities, these are examples of macro communities: YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Discord. They sort of have the aspect of you've got content coming out to the masses. Like you might be following someone or subscribing to someone, but it's very much a one-to-many communication. So if you look at this example here of YouTube, you've got a case of basically someone is playing Fortnite, and there's recommendations on the actual recommendations actually on the right with regards to what could actually be looked at. You can subscribe and join, but it's not built for one-to-one communication. Like, this is not really about a one-to-one communication. And people use this fundamentally for entertainment, following influencers, and sharing content. But it's not one-to-one. So when it comes to the brand and how brands work with games, and this has been brought up in monetization themes and tracks and so forth, is how do they actually work with the games industry? Well, if they're dealing with macro communities, they're typically looking at things like you start off with awareness, then you do the acquisition, engagement, then you go into the conversion, retention, and evangelism. And so once you've hit to the evangelism in that macro community, people are out there really talking about your product. But does this really work? Like, does that really give you the brand value, and do you target the people that make sense? This here is an example of a YouTube channel, and there's something being advertised. What do you think is advertised here? Okay, it's a power saw, okay, but it's targeting the channel, if you work it out, is Troy Boy and Diplo, Nina Sky After Hours MPO Remix. For those that are not familiar, that's electronic dance music, dedicated music channel. And the irony in this screenshot is that this brand or advertisement was targeting a millennial team member in our organisation who doesn't own a house and does not care for home improvement. Okay, so that's a fail in many ways. So again, they're trying to make awareness, but are they truly engaging and targeting the right people? So when you're dealing with macro communities, content is number one. It's really about what content you get out to the masses, and people are number two, because they're not really going one-to-one, they're just looking, okay, can we get the message out accordingly? So with macro communities, the true value is in the content that's been created on the platforms, and the main feature of this platforms is the ability to content generate and share it and create a following. But then let's look at micro communities a bit more. And this is where we see things like Reddit, Snapchat, Pinterest, Facebook, Tumblr. Now, of course you can see how these services could actually be used on a macro level, but I'm targeting here specifically the micro side of things. And I've also got Eversest here because we're targeting micro communities, and I'll show more about that experience at the end of the talk. But here, it's about how these tools are used for targeting micro communities. So if you look at the Facebook example, here is the case of someone just making the comment, oh, first time I've played Call of Duty in 7 years. And then his close group of friends come in and follow up with comments. Just so from that comment, a small micro community was formed of his friends to make a comment there. One of the best examples I've seen recently is that, hands up if you've used the service Yelp. Okay, not many Americans here, or Yelp. Okay, Yelp is basically a solution which allows you to go to the web and say, okay, I want to find out information about this restaurant or whatever. And then there's a whole bunch of comments in there and so forth. Problem is that those comments are typically from strangers, and sometimes those comments are fake. So I know, like, I'm living in the US at the moment, and we had a situation where the press secretary for Donald Trump went to a restaurant, she was kicked out, and then basically Yelp got bombarded by basically people reviewing that the site, that restaurant was the best one ever or was the worst one ever. And so Yelp had to go through and basically cleanse all of that data. What you're seeing now is that Facebook is actually, and what my wife is a member of, is like a local micro community where it's the local mothers in the suburb where we're living, and you ask the question, what do you think of this restaurant? So instead of going to Yelp where all the data is from strangers and you don't know if it's real, she can ask the local community, the micro community of people that live in the area where she is, and you get real data, you get real information. And that's where you start to see, okay, the power is not really from all the mass data, it's actually from the people that you start to trust. And so you're starting to see then that with micro communities, it's starting from the bottom. The evangelism is coming from your friends, people close to you, and that leads on to retention, conversion, engagement, and then awareness. So it's coming the other way. And you as a community member is actually driving that message. So what's a great example of this micro community with brands activity working? This is Snapchat, and brands are using these filters. And what they're doing is just making the filters available and allowing you to suddenly be the taco filter on top of your head, or the macaroni and cheese. I'll tell you what, living in the US, I can't believe how embedded macaroni and cheese is into their culture. Like, you order that at a restaurant? Why? Like, I find it very hard to understand. But you're seeing that these are just everyday people. They find the filter that they like, they think it's cool, and they share it with their friends. And this is, again, an example of how brands market through individual connections or micro-communities instead of the super influencers. And the branded filters are shared peer-to-peer, and they think it's funny, new, or different. And I like mac and cheese, or I bet you've not seen this one before, and so forth. So this is just an interesting thing of how micro-communities are working accordingly. A great example as well that I love from Fortnite is like people playing together and then going around the campfire and then just dancing with each other. Just dancing, being with their friends, and then doing something which is not necessarily integral to winning the game, but it's part of the communication within the game. And so that leads to the comment that with micro-communities, people are number one, and the interests and experiences are number two. So the focus is the people, followed by the experiences. So let's move on to our learnings. Now, as I said, like EVA is a video games community for gamers, sharing common interests in games as well as other interests. And it's built around the idea of micro-communities. So here in this picture is like I said, we launched about 3 weeks ago. It's a closed beta, meaning that you really need to be part of. We're launching with universities initially, similar to how Facebook launched. So we've launched with 10 universities in the US and launching further on with other universities over time. And we're whitelisting people that are interested in joining. So if you want to get involved, you can ping me and I'll get you whitelisted as we roll out. And we're also going to set up in Finland as well. So we're looking to build a team here. But anyway, here, at the top, you basically see just some spotlight information about, okay, Pro League is happening at 4 p.m. today. And what's interesting is that we've got these My Parties. My Parties is basically just a small micro community of your friends that are in a party. Now, similar to, let's say, pay-per-view, which exists heavily in the US, imagine a boxing fight. McGregor versus Mayweather. Okay, in the US, you'd spend about $100 to actually have that come up. And then you'd invite your friends to come over to have a party, you have food and all that, and your friends would come along and give you $10. And so that's a party that would actually take place. What we're doing here is, let's say, a virtual version of that. It's a party with your friends, and your friends are in different remote locations, and you can do many different things. And so what you can see here is that here is an example of, let's say, it's basically a group of friends playing Fortnite together. And you can actually see your friends' other screens, and you can also communicate with them over audio. And it actually is an experience which is like this party, but you're all remote and so forth. And what we're seeing people doing is that we started off with the idea that this is for gamers and it's for their gaming experiences. What we're seeing is a situation where on the mobile version, and myself as a parent and my 10-year-old, which is a Fortnite legend and coaching people, is that he's at home playing Fortnite on his desktop. I bring up the Ava app on my mobile and I go in and spectate him, and then I can talk to him and say, hey, how's things going and all that. And he's fine with that. It's not about me calling him on the mobile. It's about me jumping into his game experience like a god and communicating directly to him and say, hey, what are you up to? How was school today? Oh, fine, Dad. Oh, Dad, you're here. Oh, let me go to the item shop. Can I buy this? Okay. And then take off. And it's we're seeing different sorts of experiences take place, and we think our business model alone could actually be just making this available for parents to watch what their kids are doing remotely. But what we're seeing is also that, and with some teenage children that I've got at home, I've seen the case that they're in their rooms, they're doing their homework, all their equipment is around them, and they're talking with their friends and so forth. And we're seeing here that we've got the example here that we've got someone is playing Fortnite, someone is on the webcam, someone's on Netflix, and someone is actually watching Netflix. So they're actually having a shared party experience. And this is not about broadcasting to hundreds and hundreds of people. This is about a small micro community, a group of small friends, 15 to 20 people at max, and they're just participating and interacting and talking with each other. And so brands can actually start to look at this and see, okay, who are the influencers that are in many micro communities, and how do we actually reach out to them and get them to evangelize your brand accordingly? So, as I said, we're just out and we're learning a lot, and one of the best examples that I had, that I saw recently, was not particularly this screenshot, but it was a screenshot where we had 3 Fortnite windows in play, and they were waiting for the game to load, and they were talking with each other, and then one of the participants said, oh geez, I need to get some insurance for my car, and one of the kids said, oh okay, and then they went to the website in their own screen and educated the other player about how to buy insurance. And then when the Fortnite screen was ready, they all jumped out of that and then went into the Fortnite game. And that's what I basically looked at. It's more about the game. It's about the communities and the interaction while you're playing the game and what's around that. So we're cross-platform, naturally, and this is just an example of what was happening last night. We're watching a Fortnite aspect. Those, Eleanor and Justin were in the US. We were here in Finland. And then down on the bottom, we were at the pub drinking a beer. So we were just enjoying having a conversation and having, again, a small party with ourselves. So that's all I want to end up with. So again, wanted you to think about what does it mean to be in a community, what does a macro community mean, what do super influencers mean, what does a micro community mean, and the idea of top-down evangelism and branding versus bottom-up, starting with the evangelism going through. So, thank you.
Thank you.